this is where I feel if you are responsible for any level of cold outreach in your organization, you might be if you're good at it, you might be the single most important messaging weapon in your entire company, because you have to somehow, either in your email subject line or the first 4 seconds of words that come out of your mouth, convince the person that you are reaching out to that it is worth them spending time with you.
Welcome to Agents of Change, a podcast about the future of B2B marketing, featuring insights from executives at top agencies. I'm Danielle O'Neil with Leadtail. Let's hop on in. Hi, welcome back to Agents of Change. Today, I'm really excited to have joining us Tiffany Otten. She's a B2B marketing strategist. She has a really cool background. She has a lot of experience and expertise that she's bringing. She's currently with Power Digital Marketing. And so we'd just love to welcome Tiffany to the podcast.
Great. Thank you so much, Danielle. I'm really happy to be here.
In our initial discussion, I had so much fun just learning about your background, and that you have kind of a similar background to myself, where you started in sales and then ended up following into marketing. That was a big part of my journey as well. So as we were talking, it was that instantaneous, yes, I get it. And I think it's also cool because it does allow for a differing opinion and a different insight when we're thinking about the marketing funnel, how we're driving leads for sales, and then also the importance of both teams kind of working hand in hand. And as you stated, having that cohesive relationship. So for today, I would just love to touch on some of this and talk about how these two teams can work together, what that looks like, and then maybe even some areas of friction that we know exist. And when we're thinking about different things such as measuring, analytics, those MQLs, I know you have a very strong thought and opinion on, and drive into some of that idea.
Awesome. Yeah, it's funny talking about our backgrounds there, having started in sales. I think it does give us a different perspective that the world is a bit more ready for now than they were when we first started. Back when I began, it was really selling advertising that got me into this field. I'd had, IT sales, all sorts of things before, but then there was a company that was selling push advertising is what they talked about at the time, or push marketing. They had a search engine that was pull. People came and looked for engineering products on this site, but they wanted to be able to create a whole new kind of thing. We just called it new market development. We're like, I don't know. We know these people need stuff. Let's just figure it out. And that's what we did. But what ended up happening is people with search intent, when you started talking with clients, that type of lead had a completely different mindset than the types of leads we were introducing. We were interrupting people and asking them to consider something they hadn't thought about before. So these were really more hand raises, which are all things we understand now, but were very new at the time. So I don't even know if I should be saying this, but this is the time of talking about like BCC emails as a way to nurture. And it was very, very, very nascent, I should put out there. Silver Pop was just starting, which is not even technically around yet. Marketo. Oh, I'm going to make everybody angry in this one, aren't I? We used to affectionately refer to Marketo as marketing with crayons because they were still kind of like in their infancy too. It was very new. Those were the times, right? And now we do talk about RevOps. We talk about having a smarter eye towards what the final goal is, but that was not something that was even a term back then. It was sales and marketing fighting, like, what are all these crap leads? Why don't you get me more of the good ones? And marketing saying, well, why aren't you closing them? We've given you leads. This is a you problem. So it's wonderful that we have evolved in many ways to understand that a little bit better, but there's still, I think, some things I would really wish to just see go away if we really want to have the actual performance. And actual performance means looking first at revenue. But with B2B, you don't get that right away. So what can we look at next? And the further away in your proxy metrics you get, the more immediate you can answer questions, but the less valuable they are. And I feel like we're still stuck there today.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. And I agree with you. We are reaching that point now where it is a firm understanding, and I have a hard time, and I can't remember speaking to a client in recent years that doesn't understand the importance of having both teams together.
Mm-hmm.
As you stated, with the rise of RevOps, that was not a term a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's a term that everybody is focused on, is Are you talking to rev ops? How are you having these communications? So people are understanding the importance of driving them together. But I think there's still a bit of learning for us.
Yeah.
There is still that little bit of friction of, like you said, well, where are the leads? We gave you the leads. How come you're not closing? What does this look like? And there are some ways that we can fix that. But then there's also, both teams have to be willing to come to the table to say, I gave you this, you gave me this, but these two pieces still aren't talking. So
Right.
how do we do that? Which I think actually drives us to our first point today when we're thinking about the sales process and the brand establishment.
Hmm.
One of the things that you had said in one of our earlier conversations, and I love this idea, is that most people have that understanding of your brand by the time that they start to engage with you in any way.
Hmm.
As you'd mentioned, there's old brands that we instantly think of and we know what they are. They come to mind, they're top of mind. We don't have to be sold on them. We already understand what it is.
Hmm.
And so that's where, when we think about our clients, they have to have that brand established, because then otherwise it makes it hard for the sales reps to be able to sell to something that nobody has heard of.
Exactly.
And you have to have that consistent branding. And I know that's an area you focus on. So how are you helping clients explain what it is you have to do to establish before sales can even jump in this conversation?
No, that is such a good conversation. I find that with this topic, it helps to start at the end and work our way back. So many of our clients in particular, like we deal with a lot of B2B SaaS companies or other ones who accrue their revenue on a monthly revenue basis. And that is the easiest one, in my opinion, to subscription software primarily, the easiest one to explain, because if you could get 13 months of revenue in 1 year, would you? It should be an obvious answer to that one, if we're doing things right. So when you start thinking from that perspective, you can loosely start to understand the importance of deal velocity. Something people talk about and something people understand, but until something has driven it home as a painful point to you, you really don't get it. But if you're selling $12 million in revenue this year, if you could make 13 million just from a couple extra steps, wouldn't you? I mean, it's not that hard. Let's do it. And the funnel is shaped like this for a reason. You affect more people up here with your actions than you do down here. So start to piece these little fundamentals together and you start to have the basis for the description of this conversation. The fundamental belief that I work with my clients to understand and will often help them with an actual buyer journey project on this is, if you are doing your job right, by the time somebody has come to a conversation with your sales rep, and keep in mind, this happens way later in the cycle than it did even 2 years ago, never mind 5 or 10 years ago. By the time this conversation is happening, purchasing from you should simply be a collaboration of, how do we buy this together? Here's your needs. Here's where we service you. It's not if you buy from us, it's how you buy from us. So that should be a natural conclusion, but that's not what's happening. And that really is the main function of marketing's role in this, is to make that transition that much more smooth. Because if you are doing that, then that's the only thing sales has to worry about when they get there. If you have not done that, then sales is doing the branding. And nobody, if you say that out loud, that's crazy. Sales shouldn't have to be doing branding, but that's exactly what they're doing. If you didn't establish the brand, two people are doing it, either your competitors or the sales reps. Neither one of them is good for revenue. So that's why I use that 13-month example, 13 months of revenue in 12 months, is that if I have to do branding and prove to somebody that, power digital marketing, if I have to prove to them in the beginning of a conversation, I swear we're a legit company. I know you haven't heard of us, but these kinds of things, that's going to slow the deal. If it has slowed it 1 month, that is 1 month of MRR we didn't get. And the value waterfalls. A client who signs in January is worth way more than a client who signs in December for that year. So if you think back to that in terms of the revenue structure, then you start to see those numbers make sense to the CEO, to the CFO, the people who want to see immediate metrics. Because how do you calculate the value of brand otherwise? Well, if you can look at your velocity and you're normally a 9-month sales cycle, but you can turn it into 8 months, there's value in that. There's a lot of value in that. So that's where I start with them, to get them to understand that there actually is a financial impact of something that is meant to be intangible. And then when you get into the point of but we can't measure it that well when it's happening. They at least understand where that comes from. And there's a little bit of an extreme example I use that's kind of comical, but it's meant to highlight the absurdity of how we do track those things. Um, I've started a conversation, and I've talked about this on my soapbox many times, but I had a fever dream last night. This is how I buy my software. I had a fever dream last night, and I thought of this pain point I didn't even know I had. And then I dreamt of this company, and then I went to their website that just happened to be there, the one I dreamt up that I didn't know about. And then I filled out a form for them to contact me, and then I bought. According to how we attribute revenue, that's how it happened. I mean, that's the only conceivable way, because my lead source, my first touch, was the web form. And I might have had last touches where I then downloaded a white paper and things like that. But we don't know what drove me to the site. And there are new tools out there that can help with this. They can shed a little bit of a light on some of those pieces. But that fundamental, this is not how people buy education, is what has to happen really kind of across the C-suite, I think, to free up marketers to do the best practices that they know are what works. But honestly, they get too much pressure or they're too afraid to put into motion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I agree. And it's funny. I know it's comical, but it's kind of
Mhm,
some of the things that we've heard just in a different way. I don't know where they came from. We don't really
mhm,
know. There are ways to understand that. There are ways to dive into it. But the first piece of that is that branding,
mhm.
putting yourself out there and making sure that your buyers, those personas, these people understand your product, who you are, why they need you before they ever have that first initial call or interaction with your sales team. I know that's something that we've kind of touched on too. And I think this is where we have the opportunity for marketing and sales to truly come together to understand what is this messaging,
Mhm.
what's driving our buyers, and how do we communicate this to them before they ever land on our website. And I know that's something that you work through with your clients there. So how are you having those conversations to encourage them so that both teams are truly on the same page?
That's a really good question. There's really two pieces to that. There's what is the information, and then what is that information doing? I'm going to start with the second half of that. Way back in selling advertising, to people who were still trying to figure out what all this stuff meant, we talked about establishing the buying criteria. There's always been the structure of awareness, consideration, and intent. I think I called it action before there was a formal framework, but the whole concept of it was planting those seeds early without ever necessarily mentioning by name. But we see the listicles, 10 things to think about before you buy a car, or 10 things about car safety that you should know. Maybe Volvo wrote it and put it out there, but they also coincidentally framed the 10 consideration points to the things that they can best answer. We have now set the buying criteria so that when Ferrari comes in, if I'm looking for a safe car, I'm not thinking about Ferrari because they don't win on these criteria that were set by Volvo. We might have Subaru make a play at it because there's some overlaps, but really, if Volvo has done it right, they have trained me since the time I was 5 years old to associate them as a safe car brand. And I think that that is a permanent legacy of long term payoff on brand. But now we get into very, very, very specific and niche things, like when we're talking about certain types of security software or something along those lines, where it is a very complicated topic to understand. The first question that needs to be asked, and you ask it, but then you also need to talk to your sales reps and find out if your opinion on that is actually true, and maybe even talk to some customers on this, is how aware of the actual problem is your market for this particular product set? Because there is the status quo, and they might think that's all that's out there. And you'll have sometimes, even within the same organization, you may have a product for which your product A is a legacy replacement. So they know the problem, they just might not know there's a solution. Or it could be something that people don't even know this problem exists yet. So how far up do you need to start setting this criteria? And then when you do get there, they don't care about your company yet. They're not interested in that part. They're just learning of, wait a minute, this is something I've dealt with. And if they don't even know the problem, there's not going to be much inbound. This is outbound. This is hammering the message. This is seminars on AA ops and other types of crazy things that developer circles where that conversation is starting to happen and understand, oh, I didn't know this could affect me. Boom, pain point. Now you're starting to get where you need to go. Then you're on par finally with the other product that has problem awareness. And then it's the solution discovery. So between problem awareness and solution discovery is where the beauty and the magic of this happens. It's not easy. It takes effort, but it's also highly replicatable. And that is where you start to set, the 10 things for safe cars. Okay. Or why is X type of security practice outdated? What are the risks of the status quo? The risks of the status quo is one of my favorite things that is often left undone because the status quo is a competitor. If you make it too complicated, they're just not going to make a decision because they're kind of okay now and it's not urgent. So by the time you're in this point, and it's the part that nobody looks at in the funnel, they can't track revenue usually back to this, but this might be the single most important part of that brand perception. So you're doing everything else to put in there, but this is where that buying criteria is set. So if you are not focusing here, somebody who wants your business, a competitor, can easily come in and make that same listicle, for lack of a better, example of content, and position themselves better. Say, this is why this particular aspect is bad and not good for you and why you should do this. It's also where differentiation comes, all of those key pieces, so that when they're doing the research and they're saying, what's the best software for this problem, and it's a specific pain point you outlined, of course you're going to come up. And all of those conversations, it's a natural guide to that point of how you buy together. And it's one of those things that seems like it should be so simple, but the problem is it's hard to track for a lot of organizations where that comes from. And so in panicky times, which happen in a cyclical basis, I think in our space, when we get nervous, we start looking at right here at the very bottom of the funnel. What's our MQL? What's our SAL? How many leads did I get from this channel? What's my click-through rate? And while all of that stuff kind of sort of matters, it kind of doesn't. It's just there. So that buying criteria part really is where, in my opinion, if you have to focus dollars, it's there. And those are the same things that when you're building this out, if you're talking to your sales team, they know. They've had these conversations, because if you haven't done it, they're finding out what do they have to overcome in that conversation.
Well, and that's also where, you've got these different principles that are going to improve that top of funnel.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're thinking, again, your example, we've got the funnel, we have to be able to start thinking of which principles are here that's going to bring them down,
Mm-hmm.
so we can get so very focused on those analytics, whether it's the MQLs, the SALs, whatever it is that we're looking at. We have to start that top of funnel. And so you have to have those improvement pieces that are going to draw them in. And when we're thinking about these improvement pieces that will bring them top of funnel, there's a conversation we had recently that I thought was so good, where you were talking about working with a client that was always looking for the discount with you.
Yeah.
And, that kind of led us to earning the right to have these conversations. What does that look like? And then also understanding the importance of those conversations. So first, Tiffany, I would love if you can just talk a little bit about where and how we earn the right to have the
Mm-hmm.
conversation with the buyer. And then what does that look like, and how do you avoid falling into those pitfalls?
That is such one of my favorite topics. And I have to give credit. I don't know who wrote the article when I was working at that search engine. I think it was someone named Chris Cheriton, but I'm not sure, who actually wrote the first article that changed my entire way of thinking about that. And it was the one that explained, if you are not branding, your sales reps are doing it at the beginning of every call. That honestly was the fundamental shift in all of my understanding. So I can't take credit for that idea. That being said, this is where I feel if you are responsible for any level of cold outreach in your organization, you might be if you're good at it, you might be the single most important messaging weapon in your entire company, because you have to somehow, either in your email subject line or the first 4 seconds of words that come out of your mouth, convince the person that you are reaching out to that it is worth them spending time with you, earning the right to have a conversation. We've all had that feeling where we answer the phone thinking it's the doctor or someplace else, where like, oh no, they got my number. And it's like a 27-minute spiel. And you're like, I I gotta go. Like, you don't even care what the value is anymore because you can get to it. Versus if somebody has one well-crafted value customer language first sentence that comes out of their mouth. Tiffany, I've helped agencies like yours who are dealing with X very specific problem solve Y very specific solution. Might not be your exact thing, but I suspect potentially in your new role that this is something you're dealing with. Would you be open to a conversation? Even if I can't, then I might say, you know what, I can't, but send me an email. It's at least earned the right to have that conversation with me. And our messaging as marketers needs to follow that same thing. Our attention spans are shorter and shorter. If you haven't grabbed me with that LinkedIn headline and said, sit, stop, look at this, this is going to change your life. If you haven't had that powerful, refined message in that point, they're going to keep scrolling. You have not earned the right to then send them a bunch of emails. You have not earned the right to do this. I mean, you can do it, but it won't have any
Right.
impact.
I'm going to put us on the spotlight here too and say we have to be respectful to the sales feedback.
Right.
And we have to listen if they say this isn't happening. I know a lot of times we'll look at it from our own analytics standpoint. Well, everybody's downloading these white papers, so I don't know what's happening.
Mhm.
We're getting tons of downloads. So what are you doing when you're talking to them without being open to receive from sales of, yeah, they're downloading it, but it's crap. It's
Mhm.
not giving them anything they need. So when I get them on a conversation, I'm not able to do anything with them. And I
Yes.
think that's where I'm going to move to something that I know you have a very strong opinion about when we're thinking MQLs. It's the hot button for everybody in marketing. Let's look at these MQLs. What are MQLs? Instead, we need to look at it a different way. And I know you have a very strong opinion on
I don't really care about an organization's MQLs. It's a nice metric to have, but like any piece of data, it does not become information until it has context. So you can have a tremendous lead to MQL ratio that goes like this, and then it plummets down on the close rate at the end because it wasn't properly qualified. If you are my boss, I'm the CMO and you're the CEO, and you tell me, I don't care about anything else, I need 700 MQLs this month. I'm like, sure. I'm just going to loosen that lead scoring model. Anybody with a pulse who goes near our website has become an MQL, and I've done my job. I don't really care if they've closed, but if that's what you're pressuring me on, that's what you're going to get. Which calls to mind, what is the actual problem here? What are we all working towards? One of the things I have to say, I was really impressed when I came on board to where I'm at now is I expected pushback on certain things and changes I wanted to make to help grow our B2B division. I got none. And the reason why is everybody is held to the same KPIs. And by doing that, it changes everyone's mindset of, okay, this is good for the business, therefore it's actually good for me too. And it's an entirely different conversation because I've had a lot of clients for whom I've done similar change management, and it is like a cage match of people fighting for their specific thing. So if the CEO and the CFO are saying, you need to do this, well, that's what they're going to work towards. Whatever you're incentivizing someone for, good or bad, is the behavior you're going to get. So I really don't care about MQLs. I care about SALs. I care about SQLs. I care about revenue. And to be fair, I do understand that CEOs and CFOs have to make decisions on nearer term data as opposed to what we might know from revenue. So if it takes 18 months to close, you're not going to have that number. Ideally, things are running smoothly enough that you can have a little bit of faith in the expertise of this person you've hired as a CMO, despite the fact that CMOs have the lowest executive tenure of any C-suite position, but I digress. So yes, you have these MQLs that have come in and they may or may not close, but if you're seeing any massive anomalies along that data, it really doesn't matter. So you really have to work your way back and find a point in which you can trust the person doing their job. I think it is the fact that CMOs have the shortest tenure on average of any other C-suite tells you that there is still that massive distrust, and maybe the alignment issue isn't really between sales and marketing because they're starting to get more on the same page. Maybe it's more in the C-suite, which nobody wants to tell their client and nobody wants to tell their boss if you are the CMO, like, I'm sorry, but you're fundamentally wrong. It's an uncomfortable conversation, but I can tell you, I've probably spoken with hundreds of CMOs over the years in the role that I've had, either as a fractional or as an agency lead. And You can tell when one is supported and you can tell when one is not. And the ones who are given that space to say, okay, well, if you fail, it is going to be you, but I trust you. Take these instincts, take what you know and you have honed and make this work, then that works out so much better. I do understand you have to report on some things, and there are ways to run tests and get proxy metrics that at least tell you, you know, you have your guardrails, you're on the right track, but revenue should be the ultimate answer. And I don't know. I'll die on that hill. I really don't care about the MQLs. I look at them. I'll score towards them because it helps with the, you know, you need it for lead scoring and other things and prioritization, but it should not be a driving business metric to the extent that it typically tends to be.
Agreed. Agreed. And I think there's so much pressure put on marketing when it comes to those MQLs
Mhm,
that we do see a lot of the example that you had just said earlier, where it's like, all right, well, if you're really going to only score me based on these, then
mhm,
we're going to turn up the engine. We're going to bring everybody in and we'll see what sticks.
mhm.
And that's where I think that friction also starts to come in, is that's when sales is getting upset that
Yep.
you're giving me leads, but they're crap. They're not doing anything. I can't have anything beyond this first conversation.
Mhm,
And then marketing's coming back and saying, but look at all the leads I gave you.
mhm,
Why can't you close them? And so that goes back to what you and I had originally talked about. You have that friction. That's where heads start to butt, and that's
mhm.
where there is that great divide. And so when you're thinking about everything that we've kind of touched on today, the last part is, how do we bring that back together? We've talked a lot about the different ways that we can bring it back together, but would love to just hear from you, Tiffany, when you're having these conversations with your clients and we've gone through all of this, you've done the so what's, you've done everything else. What is your conversation with them to say, okay, you have to bring in sales. Here's what we need to do. Here's how we can better align both teams.
Ultimately, the conversation with sales, we have to be respectful of their time because they have a person based job to do, revenue generating activities. But at that point, you need to be asking them, what are the biggest barriers to you closing deals right now? When you first have that first conversation, what is getting in your way? What do you feel unsupported on from a content perspective? Is there any objection you have to overcome that surprised you? Um, what are the competitive things you're hearing right now that maybe surprised you? Like the things that they weren't expecting are really key. And then this might sound crazy, but just asking their opinion on a bunch of other things. And you know what? You might not get great data from everybody, but you'll start to see trends come up where a few of your top performing people are saying the same thing. If there's smoke for that, there's definitely fire. One of the other questions that unlocked a tremendous new market for one of my clients is I asked every one of these sales reps when we were building the sales model, I'm sorry, the lead scoring model. I said, what is your hunch about another industry that you think could actually benefit from the same processes this one was? And it was kind of on a whim, but I started asking it with all of them. And sure enough, there was a commonality that they had identified that opened up a brand new market that was not obvious to them. So I think there's maybe a little bit of a lack of respect due to salespeople sometimes than what they receive because, oh, it's a sales guy. Like everyone wants to disdain that to some degree, but they are the ones absolutely closest to your customers when they are buying. Customer care has a different relationship. They have a different set of insights that are extraordinarily helpful in a topic for another day. But the people who are hand in hand with your clients at the time that they buy are the sales folks. So they're going to have certain insights. They won't have all of them, and that's why you still have to talk to your customers. But they really need to have their input put in place, and you have to realize it's not. Don't come in with your feelings hurt. Come in with a growth mindset of being ready to have that feedback. The example you had of that white paper, a very well respected brand in my space, and I was shocked by this. They had an amazing title, white paper. I downloaded it and I stopped reading at page 5 and I put it in my B2B team chat and I was like, I want your takes on this. Tell me what you thought, like how far did you read? What was your takeaway? Every one of them was like, yeah, I stopped at page 5. The reason why is it was presented as a thought leadership thing. And on page 5, it's like, here's all of our solutions, by the way, of how we solve this. They did not earn the right to pitch me yet on that report. And those are the kinds of things that we might be thinking like, hey, we made this great paper for you, but nobody downloaded. there's things that we might not be thinking of. So what if it had 500 downloads? If it burned them in the process, and your sales reps will know this, you will not.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. And I think that's kind of one of those key important pieces. And it goes back to something we said, earlier in our conversation. Ask them.
Mm-hmm.
Have this conversation. Just simply ask them. And I think that is where there's that disconnect comes from. And that's where we all need to be better. We're all driving the same goal.
Mm-hmm.
It comes down to revenue. It comes down to organizational growth. So ask them, have this conversation.
No, I would agree.
Well, Tiffany, thank you so much. Before we go today, is there anything you're working on that you're really excited about right now?
Oh, yes. And I don't know how much of it I can talk about. I will say that if you look at the Power Digital's socials and websites, we had a really fascinating launch recently on something called Creative Affinity. And it just has some really cool implications, even in the B2B space, talking about that. And probably around H2, we'll be coming out with a new, kind of like our grand revised POV on certain things related to marketing. So all of these little soapboxes I carry around with me all the time, I'm going to place them squarely on the ground and put it out there for better or worse to be agreed with or disagreed with. But what they do all come down to, and this is the fundamental I really hope people take out of all of this, is there's a lot of scary things going on right now with marketing where we're losing cookies, or TikTok might be banned, or don't forget, email's been dead for like 20 years now. But there's always something that is the great new panic. But if you're actually focusing on the fundamentals, starting with what your customers care about, so this whole thing of what we've talked about, what do your customers care about, and meeting them with their language that they understand, literally none of the rest of that will matter. So I think that's my final soapbox of projects. And
I like it. And I join you on the soapbox. So
I appreciate that.
definitely the right spot. Well, thank you, Tiffany. It's been great chatting with you and
Likewise.
looking forward to hearing any feedback.
Awesome. Thank you, Danielle.